Hi, my name's Ron Radcliffe. I'm the game designer and creator of The Lord of the Labyrinth. Lord of the Labyrinth is a fully cooperative, multi-progression board game that will take you on an unforgettable journey through perilous labyrinths filled with danger and mystery. In this game, you and your friends will go on a quest to defeat enemies, solve puzzles, and eventually make your way to the Minotaur, the Lord of the Labyrinth, as you embark on this roguelike adventure. This game utilizes both a combination of cards and a shared dice pool between allies and enemies. So, without further ado, the Lord of the Labyrinth. I guess the first thing we'll do is show you what comes in the box. After the contest, the box will be decorated if you get this. When you first open it, these things, these two booklets also will be booklets that come in the box after the contest, but right now they're just downloadable PDFs. Both the rulebook and labyrinth maps and the rooms and storybook. And then also the optional Minotaur track, which I will talk about later. So you get that. You're going to want to, one of the first things you're going to want to do is separate out the cards. I've done this already into two piles. One of enemy cards. Enemy cards, you can tell that they're enemy cards because, well, they have an enemy, a bad guy on them, but also where it says the number of the card has a letter on it. So this is 2A. That's how you can tell if it's an enemy card. And then the other pile is loot cards. And you can tell them because where it has the number, you can see does not have a letter, but also loot cards have the number 1 through 5 up in this corner. And so you can just separate it out into the piles of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. There are a lot more loot cards. See, there's a whole nother stack. Loot cards, some of them have this back on them, but some spells are also double-sided. Enemy cards are all double-sided. There's also larger cards that have this back. Those are legendary loot cards. They're poker-sized. And then another poker-sized, the Minotaur cards. The Minotaur cards, there's 18 of them, and there's 18 legendary. You can separate them into, they're easy to separate, put them in their piles. The really cool thing about the legendary cards, though, is that they're foil. So you're going to want to separate that. There are a bunch of punch cards of you want to punch these out. I've started to do that on some of health tokens as well as some status effect tokens, like you've got poison on one side or wound on the other. There's also burn ones. So you're going to want to punch those out, set those aside, and I think it's really helpful to do this to like really organize. You want to organize the enemy cards in order. The loot cards, you can just put them in their piles of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the enemy cards in order because you're going to need to find them per room if it's an enemy room. And I do think it's also helpful in the beginning to do this because this is a meta progression game, which is different, very similar, but different than a legacy game or a campaign game. In that legacy or campaign games, there's usually a moment or two or a bunch where something happens that you can never go back from. Sometimes you rip up a card even, or you open up a box that was sealed, and once you've done that, you can never go back. Whereas meta progression, you can always replay this game. And that even includes, there's no like surprise. That means you can never go back to playing, which also means that you can see every single card from the get-go. The final boss in the game after a bunch of games is the Minotaur, and you can see all of the Minotaur's cards right from the get-go. So, but it is helpful in just kind of getting to know. There is one other card you'll see There's 6 of these. They're the same size as the mini ones. 6 of these turn order cards for your class. See, if you're playing as an artificer, you're either a thief or a tinkerer. There's also dice in here. You get a bunch of dice. And there is this giant player mat, double-sided, so you can play a bunch of different times. So I've already done a little bit of a playing with it there. And then the last thing, here they are the actual class cards themselves. They're jumbo cards. They're also double-sided. So here, if you're playing as a druid, you're either the subclass of Therian, kind of a shapeshifter, or the Sylvanist, more woodland, nature, if you will, themed. And that's what comes in the box. You're going to want to have a pencil with a good eraser nearby, just because there will be some erasing as you upgrade things on your player mat. That's what comes in the box. So the setup, we'll talk about that next. The setup with the player mat. So I'll start with a blank side here. Grab your pencil. You're going to have a player mat nearby. You're going to have your the cards that you're carrying, your carry cards or your items, your loot cards, your carry cards, another pile of equipped cards. You'll have your dice pool, as well as your class starting dice nearby. You'll have your turn order class cards kind of in the middle of the entire table, because that's where you're going to see the combat take place. You'll have your actual class card nearby. You want to have the pile of enemy cards, and again, have them in order. You'll have your pile of loot cards nearby. You can just have the pile of whatever level you're drawing from. So early in the game, it'll just be level 1. It'll let you know when you move up in each level, or you can have them all nearby. You want to have a place to roll the dice. The box works great. The box cover is a great one, or if you have a neat dice box yourself to put it in. You're going to want to have the Labyrinth map and storybook booklets nearby. If you're using the Minotaur Tracker, have that visible as well. And we'll talk about the Minotaur Tracker near the end. Just a little bit of gameplay overview, and after this, we'll play through the first 2 rooms. So this is after you've picked a class. That's kind of the first thing you do when you sit down. You pick what class you want to play as. There are 6 classes, and each class has a subclass, so really 12 that you can pick from. After you've picked a class, you've transferred all that info to your player mat. You've grabbed the starting cards. If this is your first game, the rulebook will tell you what 2 cards your specific class starts with. You'll put them nearby. If this isn't the very first time and you're just coming back to another gameplay, and your character would have already had new cards, new loot that it's collected, so you'd want to write that somewhere on your player mat, so when you sit down to play, you can grab those starting cards that you have. Then you're going to find the labyrinth you're playing through. You as a team will pick what cards you're equipping. You pick that, and then you choose the starting room, what room you're going to enter. If it's an enemy room, which are any room that after the flavor text ends with roll for initiative. If it's an enemy room, you'll set up for that enemy room, finding the enemy cards that it tells you to get. You'll roll for initiative. You'll place the turn order, and then you'll start fighting the bad guys. You'll fight through the enemies. Once they are all defeated, you have completed the enemy room, and everyone gets one upgrade. And you'll choose that upgrade. Then you'll kind of pick which room you want to go to next. But before looking and reading about the room, you will have to pick which cards you want to equip, because you might want to swap out if you think that it is potentially a loot room. You might want better loot cards. If it's an enemy room, you're going to want more spells and weapons and shields and that sort of thing. If, when you go to the room, it is a loot room, you will then roll for your search check, searching the room for good loot. And depending on how well you as a team roll for that, and there's different puzzles, dice puzzles and whatnot throughout that, depends on, you're always going to find loot, but you might find better loot if you roll well and solve the puzzle well, or if you don't do as well, then bad stuff happens. Either you take damage, or if you're using the Minotaur track, you'll move that up or down. And then you also roll for trap checks, and that is just to see if you as a team take damage, or sometimes if you roll really well, you even can gain some health back. And then, of course, you gain the loot cards, it'll tell you, and you move on to the next room. And throughout each game, you'll go from room to room in that labyrinth until you fight the boss, which is at the top of each labyrinth map. And after defeating the boss, you win. And the next game you play, you may go on to the next labyrinth. If at any point in the labyrinth, any player's HP or health reaches 0, you as a team lose. But this is a roguelike, a meta progression, and it is expected that at some point this will happen. But that's okay. The next time you play, you just start over at the beginning of that same labyrinth, but you have all your new loot that you collected and any upgrades you got. And you even know a little bit more about the labyrinth. Do you want to take the same route the next time? Or do you want to try a different route throughout the labyrinth to try that? It's up to you. And that is the quick gameplay overview. So kind of going through that now more in detail. One of the first things you do is select your class. So let's say I wanted to play as a fighter. So that means I could either be a brawler or a Deadeye. And you'd take this, let's say I was playing as a brawler, I would put that side up, and I would now want to set up my player mat. And on your player mat, at the top left, you see a name. I'm going to go with, for my brawler, her name is going to be Penny the Butcher. So I write that at the top. Then you see armor. Armor is the only thing on the player mat that you cannot upgrade without getting a card that bumps up your armor. Everything else you can, after defeating an enemy room, winning an enemy room, you can upgrade them except for armor. That only goes up via cards. Then you've got different how many dice you use on your turn, how many cards you may choose to equip, how many cards you may be carrying, different dice upgrades. You've got the 2 kind of circle arrows. That is a reroll of a dice per turn, and then the up arrow, the down arrow, is you can bump up 1 dice up 1 number, or you can decrease a dice 1 number. Spot for current HP, initiative, movement, and then the attack spell, the class ability 1, class ability 2. If we're looking at the brawler sheet, the attack or spell is flail for the brawler. And every class has an attack at the top. So you're always starting with an attack like that. They're all upgradable. So like flail, you can only use that if there is a dice that shows 4. It does 4 physical damage, but if you choose to upgrade it, it does the 4 physical damage and it adds a wound token. And then if you upgrade it again, not only does it do 4 damage, not only does it wound, but it pierces, which means it would ignore all armor. We'll just flip it over to talk about the Deadeye. That also requires the 4 dice, and it's ranged. But if you see the ranged icon there, and for the Deadeye, if you have a 4 right off the bat, it does 2 physical damage and it pierces. You can upgrade it to do 3 physical damage, and it would still pierce as well. And then if you upgrade it again, it would do 3 physical damage, pierce, and add a wound token. And that can always be ranged. So going back to the brawler. So setting up my player mat, I would then go through the different, the acumen, intellect, brawn, deft, grit, the different stats you have up there. And my acumen for my brawler is a 2. So I would circle the 2, which means that whenever I have to use my acumen stat modifier, it's at -3 right now. Oof. Then intellect is at a 1, even worse. But my brawn is at a 7, meaning it's a +0 right now. So it's not better or worse, but that's way better than the -3s I was getting. Then the deft is at a 4, which means my modifier is at -2 right now. And then grit is at a 6. Now notice where I circled the 6 has in the red next to the health icon 15. That means right now my max HP is 15. And that's how you increase your max HP, is by increasing your grit modifier. And I also would want to write flail in the attack spell spot. And then I would want to write my melee adept and all that stuff in the class ability 1, and rally as well. I think it's really important, and I highly recommend that you write them in because it helps you get to know your class and character a little bit better. And then I'd even recommend before starting the game to just share with everyone those 3 abilities that each player's character has, just so you get a better feel of what they can do. So after filling out your player mat, then you want to pick which cards you're going to carry or equip at the very beginning of this, your very first time. You're only going to have 2 cards, so you just equip both of them. But eventually you'll collect more cards, and you'll be carrying more than you're able to equip. And when you start a room, once you look up what the room is, you cannot swap what you've equipped and carry. So you want to really decide what you're going to do before. Then you pick the room. You look it up on the rulebook and Labyrinth map. The first 9 pages or so are rules, and then the next 10 are the different Labyrinth maps that you'll go through. And the last page is different keywords, glossary, as well as the credits. But then the rooms and storybook, when you on your Labyrinth map, each one will have a number with a letter next to it. So say you want to go to the first one for our first playthrough, then you're going to look at the number and the letter, and then you'll go to that page in the room and storybook booklet, and you'll go to that letter, and that is the room you're doing. And let's go ahead and play through the first 2 rooms now. One will be an enemy room, and one will be a loot room. So we'll do that now. So now the last few things I want to talk about is the Minotaur track. And as I said, this is optional. Optional because it does add more to think about, to look through. So I would understand if someone didn't want to go through it. But the Minotaur track, you start at the neutral spot. It's pretty obvious. It says start here. And depending on different loot rooms, and even some bad guys might adjust this. But how well or how poorly you do in the loot room will bump up the Minotaur track 1, maybe 2 spaces. And if the farther it goes down, you'll see that bad guys get stronger and stronger. The enemies get stronger and stronger. First, they just get more health. Then they get health and a little bit higher in the initiative. And then they get a lot of health and higher on the initiative. Whereas when it gets safer, it gives you as players the bonus of having a little more flexibility of where you want to be on the initiative track. This thematically is trying to portray just, how aware the Minotaur is of your presence and how maybe dangerous you are as a party. And so is the Minotaur sending, the Minotaur's best defenders and setting up its best traps to try and stop you? Or is he not really worried about you and a little more relaxed? That's what it thematically is going. If you choose not to play with the Minotaur track, whenever a loot room tells you to move the Minotaur track up or down 1 to 2, just adjust that to losing or gaining HP is the simple way to change that up. Dying. If any player's HP reaches 0, you lose the game. But you keep all the cards you gained. You keep all the upgrades on your player mat, and attempt that labyrinth again next time. Again, you can follow the same path, or will you try a different route? It's up to you. Whenever you complete a labyrinth, that means you defeat the boss at the top of the labyrinth map page. You may go on to the next labyrinth the next time you play. You start at the bottom, work your way up. Of course, things are going to be a little bit more difficult, tricky. You might be coming across new bad guys you haven't seen before. But that's how you get to progress through the labyrinth. And then finally, after you've gone through all 10 labyrinths, you can face the Minotaur, the big baddie at the end. The difference with the Minotaur, one of the Minotaur cards is their own turn order card. And on their turn, they draw a card from their stack. And you do what it says on there. And there are going to be some powerful spells. The one to look at is the spell Roar, which is how the Minotaur actually gains its own health back. But also the last thing it says is to shuffle all the Minotaur cards back into the pile. And so the next time you'll draw again with the chance of drawing some of the spells or attacks that it had already used. If you lose to the Minotaur, same way as before, any one player's HP reaches 0, you may choose to reattempt any previous labyrinth to gain more upgrades, gain more, maybe better loot, and just to become stronger until you can finally defeat the Minotaur. And that's it for my how to play Lord of the Labyrinth. Good luck out there, adventurers.